What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege. Today is December the 5th, here on a Thursday to kick off Week 14 in the NFL. We have a huge matchup here tonight, guys, between the Packers and the Detroit Lions. The second time they will be facing off against each other tonight. We'll go into the match while also later on in the show talking about the implications of what a win could mean for the Lions and also what a loss could mean for them as well. Also on today's show, we're going to go through the game picks, part one of the Week 14 games. Then we're going to conclude it with part two on tomorrow's show. And also talking a little bit more of the quarterback controversy, if you will, on quarterback sliding. What's the protocol there? Should they be penalized for big hits on themselves from defensive players, or should they be held more responsible, not just on the defensive player side? So we're gonna go into all of those things, have a bit of a discussion here as we go through and get closer to kickoff on Thursday Night Football. But before we get going on any of that, if you guys have any questions, comments, or opinions you'd like to share on the show, please don't hesitate to do so. Your input and insight is always a big part of what makes this show great. Hearing what you guys have to say, your reactions to anything is always welcomed on any of the live shows. So please don't hesitate to use the chat option for any of your comments during today's show. And if you want to make it absolutely sure that your message stands out and gets featured on the show, there's an easy way to do that just by using the new Super Chat feature. Just click the $ at the bottom of the chat box to send in your Super Chat. And this way, it guarantees that your message gets on the air, and it's also a fantastic way to support our channel. So go ahead and let us know what you're thinking. Hit the Super Chat button, and let's keep this show as interactive and as exciting as possible. We always appreciate you guys whenever you guys are able to do that, and also sharing your thoughts is something we always encourage on all the live shows. So without further ado, like I mentioned, we're going to start things off by looking at this preview that we have tonight between the Lions and the Green Bay Packers. A gigantic matchup in the NFC North tonight. It's round two of the Packers and the Detroit Lions here. The first time around, it was played in Green Bay, and the Lions went on the road and won that game 24-14. It felt a lot more convincing than the score suggests, right? It's only a 10-point game. It's not like they completely destroyed them, right, based on the scoreboard, but it felt like the Lions, to me, like they were never in really any threat of losing that game, so that's why I said that. But, I mean, it just falls along the lines of what the Lions have been this year. I mean, they have an 11-1 record, and they still hold on to that number one seed in the NFC. While on the other side, the Packers, they're looking to get some revenge here because they are on a 3-game winning streak and have been playing better. They're sitting at 9-3 right now. They're the number 6 seed in the playoffs, but they're only a game behind of the Minnesota Vikings, who are also only 1 game behind of the Lions. So the NFC North is very tight, and they're all jostling for positions here. And based on what we're going to talk about, looking at this matchup and how it's both of those teams right in the NFC North, some things to keep in mind that hold a lot of significance in the matchup tonight. So one thing is that both teams are playing in their third game in the last 12 days, but of course, with them playing on Thursday, depending on if you win or lose, you're going to enjoy, or you're really not going to have a great time on the mini bye week, after you play on Thursday Night Football. So there is that, right? They get a little bit of a break after playing a lot, quite honestly, over the last 2 weeks. Also, it's interesting that we have both interception leaders in tonight's matchup. We have Xavier McKinney, tied for first place in the NFL with 7 interceptions, and also with 7 interceptions on the other side, Kirby Joseph as well. Last time they played, Kirby Joseph actually returned an interception on Jordan Love there to end the first half, and that really swung the momentum in favor of the Lions. So both of them sit right now at number 1 with 7 interceptions, really policing the backside of each of their defenses. Also, on the subject of safeties and things like that, Brian Branch, if you guys remember, phenomenal player for the Lions, right? But if you guys remember in the first game, he was actually ejected for, I believe, targeting. I know he had a big hit on one of the Packers players, and I'm almost certain it was like a second degree sort of unnecessary roughness call or something along those lines, and he was ejected pretty early in that game, and still the Lions won. So he is probably obviously going to play the entire game, hopefully barring any crazy thing that happens, right? But he is going to be there the entire game, and it'll be interesting to see how that affects the game plan, right? Obviously, having to account for him for the entire 60 minutes. Also, in this series, it's been a little bit weird with the home and road teams because the road teams have won 4 straight games in this series. Green Bay has also won 5 straight NFC North road games as well. And Green Bay, last year, if you guys remember, it was around this time where they had a huge win over the Lions in Detroit on Thanksgiving. And then from that point on, they really just started skyrocketing to where we saw them at the end of the year and in the playoffs. So they're looking to try to have the same luck here again. Jordan Love has been playing better, so there is that. But it is a bit interesting there. The road teams having a lot more success, oddly enough, in these matchups. But on that note, looking at the home team, first off, a lot of injuries. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. A lot of injuries for Detroit, and kind of zoning in on them here for a second, because you look at who is out. It's not just who's out, but how many people are out as well, which is insane to look at, because in tonight's game, there's going to be no Taylor Decker, their offensive tackle, Josh Paschal, one of their pass rushers, DJ Reader, one of their defensive linemen, and Levi Onwuzurike. Levi Onwuzurike is also not going to play tonight. All those guys are just out for tonight. It's no long-term thing. But I mentioned how many people are on IR and have been missing an extended period of time. You look at Khalif Raymond, Marcus Davenport, Aiden Hutchinson, Alex Anzalone, Derek Barnes, Malcolm Rodriguez. All of those players are on IR. And Malcolm Rodriguez, Marcus Davenport, and kind of Aiden Hutchinson are pretty much out for, if not the entire season, the majority of it. So that's obviously been hurting them. On the defensive side, because obviously they're playing great right now, but could you imagine if they had most of these guys healthy, where they would be right now? It would be almost unfair, you would like to think. But that's really what the story is with the Lions. How do those injuries impact not just this game, but going forward, where they're going to play some of the best teams in the NFL? So that is something to keep an eye on as well in tonight's game, and obviously going forward. But for the Packers too, some big injuries as well for them. Ejarian Cooper, their rookie linebacker, is not going to be playing tonight. He's out with a hamstring injury. Jair Alexander continues to be out of the lineup. He won't be able to go. He's still dealing with a knee injury. And Romeo Doubs was not able to make it for this game, dealing with that concussion. All of those guys are out. But for the Packers, right, a big thing for them, Josh Jacobs, right, he's come to life for them over the last couple games. Recently, their offense to me looks a lot more efficient, looks a lot smoother and just cleaner in the way they go about things. It doesn't really, die off or has like this spell of like going 3 and out or anything like that because of that running game. And I've said it a couple times that I would like them to use it even more, right? Find ways to kind of use it a lot more in their game plan, because Josh Jacobs, he was brought in for performances like this to make a difference in games like this as well. So I'd like to see him being used a lot tonight, and I think that would be a great, sort of aspect or contribution for the Packers to get a big road win here in the NFC North. But similarly to that point, we're going to look at the matchups here, and I'm really interested in these because Josh Jacobs is one of the matchups I'm looking at. Josh Jacobs going up against this Lions defensive line, who won't have DJ Reader, who won't have Zach Pascal as well, and they're already without Aiden Hutchinson, obviously. So it's pretty thin at that defensive line position, right? No linebackers, really. Most of their starters are injured or at least not playing tonight. So that's going to be huge. How impactful can Josh Jacobs be? Is he still going to be getting, those 20 touches and getting over like 80, 90 yards rushing and really helping this offense move against the Lions defense that's still pretty respectable, in their own right. They like to play a lot of man coverage. They usually have a lot of guys around the line anyway. So can Josh Jacobs get something going and make the Packers a bit more multi-dimensional? That'll be huge in tonight's game. Also, another thing to keep an eye on is Jordan Love matching up against Brian Branch and Kirby Joseph, right? Because I saw this stat today on ESPN where Green Bay has the amount of explosive plays that they're able to produce is about 7.4% of their plays are for 20 plus yards, which is number 3 in the NFL as of right now. And that's awesome for them to have, right? These big explosive plays, but how much are they going to try it when you have Brian Branch back there, when you have one of the interception leaders back there, trying to keep everything in front of them, right? Not only that, but kind of orientating yourself and knowing that Brian Branch is over here, Kirby Joseph is coming down, where do they rotate and things like that? Are they playing man coverage or do they bail and things like that? All of that chess game between them and Jordan Love is going to be huge, right? Can they take those big plays away? And then if they do that, how does this offense, adjust? Or are they just going to, stutter over themselves and get into a bit of a lull? Will be super interesting to watch tonight. And, of course, I had to mention it, Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery against the Packers' run defense, right? The Packers' run defense has been able to hold Christian McCaffrey to 31 yards in these last couple games, and the Dolphins total to 39 rushing yards. But last time they played the Lions, David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs combined for 138 rushing yards. So they get another opportunity to try and stop them. And much like Josh Pace, they set the pace, they set the tone. So how effective can they be, and how urgent are the Packers going to be to stop these guys? How many people are they going to bring down to the box to stop that running game? Will be super fascinating. But in terms of who I think is going to win, I haven't seen Detroit lose. They lost one game to the Bucs, but they played pretty bad. So I haven't seen a team, especially go into Detroit and, just in a game where both teams are playing well and you don't know who's going to win. I haven't seen a team close the deal and go in there and, get the job done. So I'm still going to roll with the Lions. They're still the best team, in my opinion, in the NFL, and their offense is super, super difficult to just kind of disrupt. They do everything on pace. They include motions, and they do a very good job of that zone read runs and play actions with Jared Goff. He's exceptional at that. So I'm going to go with them. I'm going to go with the safe pick, if you will, with the Lions. And until I see somebody do it, I'm going to continue to pick the Lions. I think it'd be foolish of me to just hope that the Packers win. I'd have to see them do it. So I'm expecting the Lions to win tonight at home. But in the meantime, before we get closer to kickoff, we're going to move on to our next topic, diving more into this quarterback controversy on the hit on Trevor Lawrence and how that sparked this entire conversation on how much responsibility should defensive players get, should quarterbacks protect themselves better and not take advantage of the rules. All of that is going to be discussed when we return after this break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is
We are back here on the Chip Shot Football Podcast to dive a little bit deeper into this conversation around quarterbacks and protecting quarterbacks in the NFL, because a question about the quarterback protection and their ability to run really has dominated the conversation because of Azeez Al-Shaair's hit on Trevor Lawrence this past weekend and the suspension that fell on him. He appealed it and everything like that, but it was upheld, and he is going to miss the next 3 games, which, again, I want to say that is fair. I want to emphasize that I think the suspension was accurate and, was fair to suspend him 3 games for how unnecessary and just really, I don't like calling it dirty, because I don't think he's a dirty player or anything like that, but it looked excessive is what I'm trying to say. So I think the suspension is fair, but that's not really what we're going to talk about. Not directly. It's a macro idea of the ability that the quarterbacks have of running, right? This day and age where you have a lot more athletes playing quarterback, right? Not your traditional Peyton, Eli, Tom, those guys, Phillip Rivers, those guys that are great in the pocket, right? Drew Brees is another one. There's a lot more athletes, so to add to the offense to make it more dynamic and harder to stop, you have these quarterback runs, and there's no problem with that. It's just an evolution of the game, right? But you get into tricky situations like these where the NFL obviously tries to protect the quarterbacks. The rules, like it or not, are bent differently for the quarterbacks than they are for everybody else. That's just how it is. That's the attraction, right, of the teams and of the NFL. So they also get paid the most money, so it actually makes a lot of sense. But when you get in situations like these where you get a dangerous hit like that, everybody goes right to the defensive player, right? Like, oh, that's a dirty play, that's a dirty player, they should be ejected, suspended, fined, everything like that. They're looked upon as the bad guys. But, DeMeco Ryans, the coach of the Houston Texans, mentioned it afterwards that, yeah, I mean, the hit wasn't great. He stood up for his guy, but he also, took the side of the quarterback a little bit. But he also mentioned how the idea of quarterbacks running, yeah, I mean, they could do it, but also it's a tricky situation where he said it was twofold, where, they also bear some responsibility, where, running is a pretty dangerous thing to do as a quarterback, in all honesty, right? When you're running, defensive players, trying to make a play on the ball, aren't stopping to really consider, oh, this is a quarterback, I should go 50% here, right? That's not how people think. At that point, you become a runner, and it's not fair for defensive players to kind of reconsider everything and kind of be 50-50 and not knowing what to do. And DeMeco Ryans was the first one to bring it up. And I thought also what Tom Brady said on it recently in an interview this week was also, harping on that point, and I thought it was pretty interesting what he had to say about it. So he mentioned on The Herd, I'm pretty sure, he said, the quarterbacks need to take better care of themselves. When you run, you put yourself in a lot of danger, and when you do that, I don't think the onus of protecting an offensive quarterback who's running should be on a defensive player. I don't think that's really fair to the defense. And also, I didn't fully write it out, but he also made a couple interesting points after that. He said, if you're going to slide, obviously get down quickly. You can't 50-50 it, because then you open up the door to, obviously, now you have a possibility of these big hits happening, right? If you could get down and quickly do it, don't think twice about it, because the defensive players are coming to get you down. So it's better off for you, for what your value is as a quarterback to your team, to just get down. More often than not, if it's like the second quarter, it's like second down or something like that, just get down. There's no need to kind of risk it. Also, he mentioned that defensive players have to be aggressive. That's just their nature, as Tom Brady put it. He also said that he questions about trying to protect quarterbacks. If so, he mentioned, or he questions the offenses, right? The offensive coordinators, the head coaches, the team really of the quarterback, if they are all about protecting the quarterback like they say, if they're all about, keeping these guys upright and healthy, why are there so many quarterback design runs, right? That's what Tom Brady said. He suggested just staying in the pocket. If you really want to protect the quarterback, in all honesty, it makes sense, right? Staying in the pocket, because more often than not, if defensive players are over aggressive while you're standing in the pocket and they sack you or they hit you a little too aggressive, the flag's always going to come out in your favor. And that time, you're not really opening yourself up to any danger, right? You're just trying to stay in the pocket and make a throw. There's nothing wrong with that. Whereas when you escape, your comfort zone, your realm a little bit, then you start kind of drifting into the defensive player's territory, right? They're trying to defend every blade of grass. So if you kind of venture into that avenue, that, path, the rules change a little bit, right? It's not the safe haven, right, of a quarterback pocket. So Tom Brady also mentioned that, questioning why there's so many quarterback runs if you know that they could be opening themselves up for taking more hits like this. And I thought it was a pretty decent idea for what Tom Brady said when he said fining or penalizing a quarterback for sliding late in order to get offenses to try and avoid these things and not take advantage of the rules, right? Instead of just blaming the defensive player, start holding the players accountable, like the quarterbacks accountable, the offensive side of the ball accountable, right? They're going to stop doing it if they know if I, overextend a little bit or if it looks a little bit shady, like I'm trying to take advantage of the rules, I'm going to get penalized, right? Not only am I potentially taking a big hit, but also I could be losing like 10, 15 yards, and then you really get nothing out of it, right, at that point. So I thought that was a pretty good suggestion, but overall, the point Tom Brady makes about staying in the pocket, I think, is interesting because it kind of relates back to a point he made like months ago where, the quarterbacks nowadays, the young quarterbacks nowadays don't really operate under center, don't really operate in the pocket, right? You see a lot more of like happy feet, right? They get a little bit anxious and then they just start to run. And then, from that point, there's a lot more running, obviously, from the young college age of quarterbacks coming in more now. And, quite honestly, it is what the mold is right now of an ideal guy. Just being a reserved pocket guy, it's not really what fits the NFL now. So I thought that was interesting where he brought that up because I just don't think it really fits this day and age of the NFL anymore. But, I think it connects to what was revealed by Dan Campbell also. I thought this was really interesting too. When Amon-Ra St. Brown, obviously the Lions wide receiver, he mentioned it on his podcast, and it was funny how this kind of happened before the Trevor Lawrence hit. But, nobody made a big deal about it like they do with Trevor, obviously, because the hit on Trevor was a lot more severe. But Amon-Ra St. Brown said on his podcast that Dan Campbell stressed to his defense that they were watching film, and he stressed to his defense that Caleb kind of does that thing of taking advantage of the rule a little bit. They showed him a couple clips of Caleb, running towards the sideline, but also at the last minute kind of trying to cut up the field and gain a couple more yards. And Amon-Ra St. Brown basically said that, Dan Campbell told his defense that he's done it on a couple times. So if you guys see him kind of lollygagging around the sideline, go and hit him. Like, go and hit him and try to intimidate him a little bit and just get him to stop doing that, right? If you have a clear path to the sideline like Caleb must have had on a couple of these occasions, but he decided, to kind of take a step parallel instead of going forward, hit him. He's still trying to gain yards. You can go out there and protect that extra yard that Caleb is trying to take advantage of. So that was pretty interesting, and you saw how Caleb actually did that in their game on Thanksgiving, and he got smacked. He got smacked by Jack Campbell, and it looked pretty bad, but luckily Caleb stayed in the game. But that's, the risk you run where you look like you're going out of bounds, the defender's kind of ushering you out to the sideline, but you kind of overstep. The next time the defender sees that, he's going to hit you, and that's what happened in that situation. And it might seem a bit, excessive for Dan Campbell to say something like that, but I think that's just the level of fairness that should come with the defensive players as well, right? If a quarterback is trying to, bend the rules a little bit and kind of knows that you can't really just run up to him if he's looking like he's going to run out of bounds, they know more often than not if defenders hit them while they're doing that, it's probably going to get called for unnecessary roughness. So them knowing that, trying to extend a little bit more to gain an extra yard, they're taking advantage of it. And there's no problem with that. It's all in the gamesmanship of it. But just know that the defender, in all fairness, could come and hit you if you try and do that. So it also has to be pretty clear, though, right? I'm not saying just go up there and, just kind of like pick them up and slam them or something like that. If you see a defender, if a quarterback sees a defender coming and you can just go to the sideline, but don't, and just decide to gain an extra yard, if it's a clean hit and everything like that, there's no problem with the defender doing that, like I said before. And I think with Tom Brady also mentioning, I feel like it just has to be stressed to quarterbacks by their head coach and their defense and their offensive coordinator, like defenses do, and like Dan Campbell did as well. He told his defense, to go out there and kind of not let them bend the rules, right? Kind of show them what would happen if they try to gain that extra yard, that they are, in essence, going to pay for it, right? And the offenses, too, have to be more aware of that because they know how important the quarterbacks are. You don't want the quarterback to just be taking those unnecessary hits when he could just step out and go to the sideline, right? You appreciate the fact that they're fighting for every blade of grass, that they're trying to gain extra yards. But again, the value of losing your quarterback in one of those instances is not the same as like a defender. If the defender gets ejected or suspended, like Azeez Al-Shaair gets suspended 3 games. The Texans are not going to have one of their linebackers for 3 games, right? But the Jaguars, let's say if they were fighting for a playoff spot, right? They lost Trevor Lawrence for 4 weeks, right? He's on the IR for 4 weeks now. And he's going to be out longer than the linebacker. And the linebacker, the defensive player, is the one that really, got penalized. Trevor didn't get penalized, but he lost out because he's going to be out longer for taking a hit like that. So the value of the quarterback, kind of taking that all into account, I think the offenses have to be, telling their players, right, that they're too valuable, right, to always take hits like that. So obviously, quarterbacks need to be protected because of all of that, but defenders are at a risk too. There was a great example that I saw where, the game against the 49ers where Patrick, had that one instance where he looked like he was going to the sideline, then he cut it up and he gained like 15 extra yards. But later, when they were on the goal line, Patrick ran like a quarterback sneak and the defender was coming to hit him, right? And Patrick just absolutely like pile drived them, right? He trucked them into the end zone. So it's instances like that where if you're telling the defenders to basically not hit them and that they're always going to be the bad guy, the defender in that instance, he got, trucked. But if he was like kind of 50-50 on it and he like was hesitant to go and try and tackle Patrick, not only was he going to basically let him walk into the end zone, but he could have gotten seriously hurt. Luckily for the defender, he was coming to actually hit Patrick. But if he was going up there like 40%, 50%, and Patrick still trucked him, not only was he going to give up the touchdown, but he was going to get pretty severely hurt, right? You don't want to have the quarterbacks just like cave these defenders' chests in, right? Especially when they're big quarterbacks like Patrick or Josh or like Justin Herbert or something like that. So that's also something that's not really fair, right? The defenders have to be, protected and have to be accounted for in their safety overall. So, I mean, I thought this conversation could go longer, and I thought it was really interesting how a lot of people, brought it up because, quarterbacks can't be untouchable, really. That's the main message. They already have a lot of protection, and I think the game is in a good spot right now with the way, defenders can sack quarterbacks, what they can't do, dropping all of their body weight on quarterbacks, right? But you can't, overextend and have it both ways, right? You can't run freely, but also, act like you can't get hit or be considered a runner, right? You can't run out there and try and gain extra yards like a runner, but also be protected like a quarterback, right? You can't have it both ways. If you're out there running and really not going down, at that point, the defenders have, I think, in my opinion, as much right to go over there and try to stop you any way that they can. So, I mean, it's a fascinating conversation because when a hit like that happens, it's scary, right, for the health of Trevor Lawrence, but it brings up conversations like this where I think, both sides make definitely a lot of sense in conversations like this. So we'll see how, the NFL goes about this going forward. But And speaking of going forward, we're going to get to our game picks. Part 1 of our game picks for Week 14 in the NFL are coming up right after this break. Don't go anywhere.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
We are back here on the Chip Shot Football Podcast to get back into our normal routine of going through the game picks each and every week. Part 1 of Week 14 will be on today's show, and then tomorrow's show will conclude with Part 2. Not a lot of games to get to because I previewed the Falcons game yesterday, so I'm not going to redo that again. So we got 5 games that we're going to look at here for the games on Sunday, and there are some pretty interesting matchups, though, saying that. And starting off with one in the AFC North, right? The Cleveland Browns and the Pittsburgh Steelers meeting once again. A rematch of the Thursday night football game that both of these teams obviously participated in the snow, where the Browns won that game. And to be honest, it was a pretty sweet victory, right? To not only, win a game, obviously having the season that the Browns were having, but also defeating the division leader in the Pittsburgh Steelers with that rivalry that both teams have, having them come into your house and, beating up on them pretty well, in all honesty. Must have been a great win for them. And it was, right? Myles Garrett had a great day. Jameis Winston had a big day as well, and they stuck it out, right? There was a point where I thought the Steelers were going to pull it out, kind of undeservingly, but the Browns stuck to it, and they were able to kind of pull away and have a big win there in front of their home crowd in the snow. It doesn't really get better than that in the kind of season that they were having as well. So, that was a big win. Although the Browns are just coming off of a, crazy game on Monday Night Football against the Broncos, a shootout, a game where you just saw it all, but the Browns ended on the losing end of it, while the Steelers rebounded pretty well against the Cincinnati Bengals, where they put up 44 points. Russell Wilson had a day, and the offense looked like nothing it had ever looked like in the past couple of seasons. So the Steelers are riding high, especially with the loss to the Ravens. They're in a better spot of holding on to that division title if, they handle their business going forward. But in this game, it is a rematch. There's a lot of high tension, right, with George Pickens and the cornerbacks, and George Pickens basically saying that he didn't think they were a good team. The Browns, ended up winning that game anyway, so they hold that over their heads. So that's going to be a lot more of what makes this game interesting, those extracurriculars. There's always going to be that in divisional games, but it feels like there's a lot more animosity with the Browns and the Steelers. But in terms of who's going to win, I think I found the stat today that Cleveland hasn't won a regular season game in Pittsburgh since October 5th, 2003. That's almost all of my lifetime. And this season, Cleveland is 1-5 on the road, while the Steelers are 4-1 at home. So I think there's a good opportunity for the Steelers to kind of get their revenge here. So I'm going to go with the Steelers. It's going to be close, because Jameis Winston's playing pretty well, to be honest. But I think the Steelers should have enough to kind of get the revenge here and win the game at home. Then we drop down just one row and look at the Saints and the New York Giants. The Giants are still the only team in the NFL to not win a single home game this season. It's pretty remarkable. They're 0-6 at MetLife this year, and they're on a 7-game losing streak going into this game. And it's also not great from the personnel side because Dexter Lawrence was placed on the injured reserve with an elbow injury, most likely ending his season. So I'm not feeling great, obviously, if you can't tell already, about the Giants because of the fact that their best player's not playing, and they're going to go up and face Alvin Kamara at home. It's not a great matchup. It's not a great look, to be quite honest. And the offense also with Drew Lock, he is going to be starting this week after Brian Daboll announced it on Wednesday. He played against the Cowboys. That was kind of a surprise, but now he gets to start again. I assume Tommy DeVito is still dealing with a forearm injury. At least that's what Daboll made it sound like. So Drew Lock gets another start here, and she didn't look awful, like he shouldn't belong out there, but also, I think the team overall is just not in a good spot, so it was going to be extremely hard for Drew Lock to just come in there and make it look like something that they've never seen before. So because of that, because of the injuries and the fact that they haven't won a single game at home, I'm going to go with the Saints. The Saints have gotten some pretty impressive wins over the Browns and over the Falcons, and last week they were in it till the end with the Los Angeles Rams. So I like what the Saints are doing. I think they have a bit more momentum to themselves. So I think the Saints win here, probably by over a score, I would say. But moving down a little bit more to the Raiders and the Buccaneers game. Both teams kind of pirate themed, right? The Raiders and the Buccaneers, right? I can say that. But it is kind of odd that they're playing each other. I never really noticed it. But anyway, sticking to the game, I think it just comes down to the fact that the Bucs are, actually just playing for something, right? They're feeling good right now. They are not only feeling good, but they're playing good. Baker Mayfield's looking great. They had that scare last week against the Panthers, but even still, having Mike Evans back, Bucky Irving is kind of stepping into a stride right now where he's coming off of a career high. He's having a bigger role on the offensive side of the ball while also still incorporating Rachaad White, and Cade Otton has been a pleasant surprise as well, the tight end for the Buccaneers. So, I think that's just what it boils down to. Two teams, but just one is in a completely different state to the other one. The Raiders are on an 8-game losing streak right now, and the last win that they had came in Week 4 back in September, basically. It's been months since they were able to get a win. So, it's just unfortunate. The best thing about the Raiders now is Brock Bowers. He's phenomenal. That's the part of their team that they got right, pretty much, or that is flawless, I would say. But yeah, the Raiders almost beat the Chiefs last week, right? But this time it's going to be on the road against, again, the Buccaneers are playing for something. They could, if they win this game and the Falcons lose against the Vikings, they would be in first place in that division. So I think it's going to bring more urgency there to the Buccaneers. I'm going to say that they win against the Las Vegas Raiders, obviously. Then the next one, the Eagles and the Panthers. The Eagles are 13-point favorites in this game, and I like what Bryce is doing. I like how this Panthers team has looked recently, but it's too unfair. It's too unfair in this game. The defense for the Eagles it's too overpowered for this offense that the Panthers have, right? Bryce is playing great. I want to emphasize that again, but with Jalen Carter, bringing the pressure, Zach Bond doesn't get talked about enough. Nakobe Dean's playing great. Jordan Davis, along with Jalen Carter in the middle, are playing phenomenal. And, the defense for the Panthers, again, has been playing better, but we're talking about an MVP candidate in Saquon, and then you have to account for Jalen Hurts, and then Devontae Smith is probably going to come back, A.J. Brown. It's just too much to deal with. Maybe they'll keep it close because the Eagles struggle in the first quarter, but then after that, I expect this game to probably be over by the third quarter. So I'm going to go with the Eagles, obviously, to win at home. And then the last game we have on here is the Jaguars and the Tennessee Titans. Trevor Lawrence placed officially on the IR yesterday, and he is going to have shoulder surgery on an AC joint injury in his left shoulder. So it is going to be Mac Jones, and unfortunately for two of these teams where I had a lot of excitement for the Tennessee Titans, admittedly, I was wrong, but I was excited about them because of the projection of Will Levis, bringing in Brian Callahan, bringing in Calvin Ridley, Tyler Boyd. You had DeAndre Hopkins for a little bit. So I thought this team could be maybe what like the Buccaneers are, or like kind of like at least the Bengals, something like that, but they're not even at that level. These two teams are two of the worst teams in the NFL, and I'm not saying like this game is going to be more focused on tanking, but we could see one of those classic games where, we look back on it in the draft and we point to week 14 and talk about the Jaguars and the Titans and how the Jaguars winning impacted their draft pick, right? They got this player because they decided to win this game, or the Titans won this game and allowed the Jaguars to get a better player. Those kind of games, right? There's always one of those each and every year, and I think this one could be that, especially because both of these teams have 2 wins, and they are planning for the future. I don't think that's wrong or inaccurate to say at this point in the year. So, in terms of who's going to win this game, the Titans have played a bit better, I would say. They got a big win over Houston a couple weeks ago, but they just got smacked by the Commanders. And it is weird because the Jaguars are going to be on the road, but they haven't won a single road game. But the Titans are only 1-4 at home. So, something's going to have to give, right? Someone's going to have to kind of break the trend, and I think it's going to be the Titans. I think the Titans are going to win this game. I like their defense better. But I wouldn't be surprised if the Jaguars won, but I am going to go with the Titans because I am higher on who's on their team compared to the Jacksonville Jaguars. So those are all the games that we have for part 1. We're going to have the 5 other games remaining on Sunday on tomorrow's show. So just for the sake of time, we're going to move on with the last couple segments here. We're going to talk about, playoff implications and bring up the Detroit Lions again because they are dominating. It feels like they have the number 1 seed wrapped up already, but it's not the case because the Eagles are only a game behind them. So we're going to discuss with the Eagles kind of threatening the Detroit Lions, who would benefit more from having home field advantage all throughout the playoffs. We're going to answer that question in just a few seconds.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to the Chip Shot Football Podcast here on a Thursday, December 5th, gearing up for Thursday Night Football that features one of the teams that we are going to talk about in this segment. The Detroit Lions tonight are facing the Green Bay Packers in a significant game, right? Adding to the significance of this game is the fact that not only is it a divisional game and Detroit has already beaten the Packers, so there's a little bit of the revenge aspect there, obviously, but we could look back at this moment, I truly believe, as the moment or the starting point to one of the craziest finishes for the NFC playoff race that we've seen in maybe a good amount of time. Because, who was the 1 seed last year? Was it the 49ers? It was pretty significant last year. Pretty convincing that they were the number 1 team in the NFC conference. But this year, it's not as written off as it might seem, because I mentioned it a little bit there in the teaser, how the Lions, every team they play, it seems like they just beat them up, they just toss them to the side, and they beat them by like a touchdown or 10 points at least each and every game. If not, it's like they put up like 52 points like they did on the Jaguars and like they did on the Titans, if I'm not mistaken. So they're clearly one of the best teams. They're the best team in the NFL, in my opinion. But, it's not as, just written off, as I said. Detroit has been, beating up on teams all over the place, and they're 11-1 as of right now. before the game, and they're on a 10-game winning streak, right? You just don't stumble into being 11-1 at this point in time, but the they don't have that much room to really mess around here, right? They have to remain perfect, in my opinion, because in all honesty, Philadelphia is sprinting towards them. They're storming towards them, trying to steal that number one seed from them because they've been playing exceptional as well. Arguably, playing over the last 5 weeks, some of the best football, if not the best football out of anybody in the NFL. And they're only one game behind of the Detroit Lions for how good the Lions have been, and everybody talks about them, dominating each and every team. The Eagles, they're not really getting talked about, not really in that same light, really for the most part. And I'm sure they're not complaining, but they're right there, kind of like the Bills with the Kansas City Chiefs. Obviously, the Chiefs find ways to win. Everybody says that it's hard to beat them in these one-score games, but the Buffalo Bills are also, they're the only team that beat them, and they're only one game behind, and they also look like they're playing some of the best football currently in the NFL. So it's funny how they kind of relate there. But I believe I saw today that if the season ended and both of these teams had the same record, for whatever, kind of tiebreaker there was, I forget the name of it, but I'm pretty sure I heard that the Eagles would have the number one seed if they finished with the same exact record. I forget the exact reason why, but I'm pretty sure I heard that today. So that just makes it even more important for the Lions to kind of remain perfect, essentially, right? To ensure that they lock up that number one seed, and not only the Philadelphia Eagles on their heels, but also in their division, right? The Minnesota Vikings have the same record as the Eagles at 10-2, and even the Packers, right, who would be right in the mix if they were to go into tonight's game and get a win, weasel out a win, and now they're sitting at 10-3. The Lions would be 11-2, and if the Vikings win, they'd also be 11-2 as well. So just in their own division, right? We're talking about the playoffs and how 1 through 4 are the division winners, right? In a crazy world where maybe the Lions drop a couple games, they still got to play the Bears again in Chicago, which isn't going to be easy, and they still got to play the Vikings again as well on top of the game tonight, and they got to play the Buffalo Bills too. So they got a tough schedule, and let's say they maybe lose 2 more games while the Eagles don't lose another one. In a crazy world where the Vikings also, might not lose another game, or maybe they just stay the same, the Lions could drop to the wild card spot, where all season we've been talking about them being the best team, and they might not even have a home game, and maybe the Eagles jump that, or maybe an even crazier scenario, the Packers somehow win the division in a crazy scenario. It's not ruled out by any means. So, if any of that happens, it's going to be insane, but it just adds more, emphasis to the Lions, right, to have home field advantage. I think for the first time since like the 1950s, they would have home field advantage all throughout the playoffs. So, they're definitely playing for something significant, right? And I mentioned the schedules earlier. To be exact, the Lions have the 3rd hardest remaining schedule in the NFL, whereas the Philadelphia Eagles have the 5th easiest schedule left out of these 5 to 6 games that we still have coming up. Really 5. If you look at their schedule, I mentioned who the Lions were going to play, right? The Packers, they play the Buffalo Bills at home the following week. They travel to Chicago. They travel to San Francisco, and their last game of the season could be, for the division, right? Playing the Minnesota Vikings as their last game of the regular season. So that's how many teams? 1, 2. That's 3 playoff teams that the Lions are going to have to play over the last couple of games here. And whereas the Eagles are going to have to play the Panthers at home, the Steelers at home, they travel to Washington, they host the Dallas Cowboys, and they finish it off hosting the New York Giants. Out of all those teams, the Eagles are going to play 2 playoff teams, whereas the Lions are going to play 3. So, but even still, the other teams are, how many wins combined? There's 3, 7, there's 9 wins combined between the other three opponents that the Eagles are going to have to play. So the schedule isn't favoring the Lions whatsoever. So, Detroit hasn't had the top seed, like I said, since the 1950s. But in terms of the question, right, obviously, as you guys see it, who would need home field advantage more? Who would benefit more from having every single game in the playoffs be a home game? I believe that it'll be the Eagles. I think, to me, in my opinion, the Eagles need home field advantage more, and they would benefit more from having home field advantage, I think, than the Lions will. And people will right away point to the fact that, like, the Lions, they play indoors. How could the Eagles benefit more when the Lions could be playing in inclement weather or in the cold or in different surfaces? I don't know. I think that's the easiest argument you can make, right, for why Detroit would need to have home field advantage more. But also the fan atmosphere, obviously, different atmosphere, right, playing in Detroit than playing on the road at Philadelphia, right? But it's not only that, but I just feel like, Detroit at this point to the season is undefeated when they're on the road. They're 6-0 when they're on the road. The only loss that they've had, ironically, has been at home to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And this isn't a situation where we're talking about the Miami Dolphins, right, where they can't play in below 40-degree weather. To me, weather is irrelevant when I'm talking about the Lions. When you're really talking about any good team, right, weather and playing indoors, outdoors, in different surfaces, that stuff doesn't matter. And I think the Lions are that good. Clearly, they're 6-0 on the road. And to me, talking about the weather and outdoors versus indoors doesn't really hold too much significance, especially the way the Lions play, right? Smash mouth, trying to bully you and impose their will on you rather than, being flashy or, doing all these other stuff, right? They have a lot of intricate stuff, but don't get it mixed up. Like, they'll go out there and punch you in the mouth, basically. So the way that they play, I don't think it really has to do anything with the weather. We're talking about a tough, gritty, just nasty, run-heavy team, sort of like Philadelphia also in their right as well. So I think when you're talking about those teams, if they're actually all about that, weather doesn't really matter. But the main thing to remember is I believe Philly would benefit and need a home crowd support in these games because of their slow starts. If they continue to have slow starts, in order, to get another comeback victory and, have these opportunities to go down early and still come back like they did against the Ravens on the road, to be fair, I think they need a home crowd. I think they need that home crowd support to kind of give them that extra bit of juice because, I hope they fix these problems going forward, right? They can't just continue to not score in the first quarter and think that they're just going to come back. Not in the playoffs, right? Not against the Detroit Lions, in my opinion, right? The Eagles' slow starts are worrying, especially because if we're talking about Detroit and how they're super run heavy, if you start slow against the Lions, let's say in Detroit as opposed to in Philadelphia, if the Eagles go out there and go down 10-0, 14-0 or something like that, I think at that point, what's made the Eagles so great is the fact that they don't really go away from their running game, the fact that they stick to Saquon and he kind of closes the game out for them, right? But if they go down early, especially to a good team like the Lions, and not to mention the Lions, in a situation like that, they've been there before just last year where they had that huge lead on the 49ers and they gave it up. If they're in the same situation this year, because also, they learned from that, but also they're a good team, I don't think the Eagles are going to have really any opportunity to come back and just think that it's going to be another comeback victory for them, at least not without a home crowd. I think a home crowd can really change the momentum and how things are looking, but if you're on the road and you're down like 2 scores or 3 scores maybe, if you're down 17-0 or something like that, I think it becomes very, very tight. Everything gets tight. You get a little bit nervous, everybody's cheering. It's super loud in there, especially if you're talking about a dome and how the noise just stays in there, right? Obviously, you start to kind of panic a little bit. You start to rush, kind of not go through your usual things. And to me, my fear would be that they'd start becoming one-dimensional again. They start throwing it a lot and not really including Saquon, who is their best player, who is the catalyst, the game changer that they've brought in. I feel like they would become one-dimensional again. And not to mention the fact that the Lions would just run the ball a lot and obviously take away time from them. So that's really my main issue with it. I think that the Eagles would definitely benefit if, the biggest caveat is if they continue to have these slow starts. I think they could get past teams like the Commanders, like, I don't know, who wasn't in the wild card, like maybe the Packers, depending on, again, if they're home, obviously. I feel that they could get by teams like that. They already beat the Packers this year. So, but when it comes to the Lions, when it comes to playing on the road and say like the NFC Championship game, starting slow against a team like that, that's almost the mirror image of what you like to do, I think that it wouldn't really bode well for them. So that's why I say the Eagles would benefit more from having home field advantage, because if they continue to start slow, at least they'll be supported by the home crowd. But if not, I think it makes it too difficult to ask for something like that in such a crucial game. So that's how I feel about it. I mean, the Lions would surely love to have it, but I think they wouldn't need to have it as much as the Eagles, if that makes sense. So that's kind of how I feel about it. I heard that topic at some point today, so I thought it would be interesting to talk about it. But we do have one more segment to get to here. We're going to stay in the NFC North and talk about Caleb Williams and the head coaching situation with him. There's been a lot of turmoil and a lot of change in Chicago this season. Obviously, it's not been ideal for Caleb Williams whatsoever. So he had an opportunity to talk about it, reflect on it, and he answered whether or not it was going to affect him in the long term. So we're going to get to his response and our thoughts on it when we come back right after this. Thank you guys for joining me here on the last segment of today's show. We're going to talk about the Chicago Bears a little bit more here, because I feel like we talked about the Vikings, the Packers, and the Lions a lot this episode. And, I mean, not that we're ignoring the Bears, obviously, but, they are the odd team out, right? The one team that hasn't had the season like all the rest of the teams in the division, right? The rest of the teams are near the top of the NFC, where the Bears have really struggled. And the struggles really culminated with the firing of Matt Eberflus, right? That felt like the final straw, like the last thing that would have to happen this season to kind of label it as a complete meltdown of what our expectations were. But this really was the last thing that could have happened in a season that, if it was going to end in a disappointment, it was going to be because, they got rid of the offensive coordinator. The head coach wasn't doing great, so they fired him during the season. And I want to say that it was the right thing to do, again, because waiting for the end of the season, in a way, trying to not go through another change, kind of to protect Caleb Williams a little bit, that seemed irrelevant to me, because Chicago wasn't going anywhere anyway. So firing him at the end of the year, as opposed to right now, it was going to be the same thing. And I'm sure, the Bears knew that it was going to happen anyway. But things, were boiling over also. I think that's also important to point out. The actions on the field were awful, were bad enough, right? Just having to watch it. But I think, like I mentioned, with the players kind of already having an inkling of what was going to happen, you got a good sense of that. That the players, were now turning on the head coach, that they were pointing the finger at him. And really, when you have that kind of atmosphere in the locker room, you can't keep it going. If only there was like 5 and 4 games left in the season. When it starts to go like that, you can't just allow it to happen just because, there's 3 or 4 games left, right? They had to cut that off. So I think that also led to the firing of Matt Eberflus. And also, you hear guys like Jalen Johnson talk about the firing and how he suggested like he kind of expected it to happen. Tevin Jenkins, another player that wasn't really, standing up for Matt Eberflus or anything like that, but rather, accepting of the decision. Same thing with DJ Moore. He reacted in a way that, he said, in essence, that he kind of knew that it was going to happen. So you can see why, it was time. The players were having this sort of attitude towards him, and he rightly should have been fired for, again, what we saw on the field was awful. But now, I mentioned all those other guys, but Caleb now had a chance to talk about it as well. And in Caleb's first season, it obviously hasn't gone great, not even, the bare minimum of what you'd consider an okay season. It hasn't even really been that. And usually, seasons like this are the beginning of how quarterbacks begin to get ruined, right? The first season, an iffy head coach, you don't really know too much about him, or you're not really confident in him going into the year. Things fall apart like they did for the Bears, and they move on to another guy, right? And then they bring in a new guy. The young quarterback has to learn a whole new system, and basically you don't see any progression, and maybe they get rid of that head coach, and it's a continuous cycle of coaches, players coming in. The Chicago Bears would know, right? They've done it a bunch of times already with Mitch, with Justin Fields, during a time where they had Nick Foles in there trying to be their quarterback. Chicago would know exactly what we're trying to reference here, right? But Caleb isn't overly worried about all of that right now, and, the long-term effect that it could have. His experience in his first year, he's not really too worried about it, or what these changes could kind of affect him like going forward in the long term. And I thought it was pretty interesting what he had to say on it, because he said, I think this is a stepping stone of development. To be able to have all of this in my first year, I wouldn't say that I'm happy for it. Having these moments is definitely something that will help me in the future. And he also said that handling all of this in a short period of time, right? Because Shane Waldron wasn't fired too long ago, and then the head coach goes as well. He said it'll essentially just help him grow, and in a way just kind of help him mature a little bit, expose him to, and I don't want to overdress this, kind of just expose him to what the NFL essentially is, right? It's a hard, cutthroat sort of business, right? And it really doesn't have any, ill feelings about any player or coach, right? If you're not performing, if you're not doing your job out there, and it's kind of obvious like this decision was, there's no like freebies or just staying on or like pity a lot of the times. If you're not doing a good job, there's no problem moving on. The quarterbacks, teams shuffle through them like it's nothing. The coaches, the coordinators, it's an ever-flowing thing. So it's reality. It's a bit of a harsh reality, right? When you're talking about development and building chemistry and things like that, right? A lot of the times it doesn't fall like you'd hope for. But I think Caleb, put it in a good way where he said that it is going to help him, harden him, kind of scab him to the idea that, this is how it is. And, going through all of this, if you're able to get through it and come out on the other end pretty well for yourself, I think I would agree with him that this is only going to make him better. And it's not like this year. I feel like Bryce Young struggled a lot more in his first year. And this year for Caleb, we've seen some moments of why he was selected as the number 1 overall pick. The game against the Lions, he could have won that game. He could have beat the Packers as well. And, he could have beaten the Commanders as well, if not for that Hail Mary. There's some games in there where he's made some pretty impressive throws. He's had some pretty impressive drives as well, some pretty phenomenal second halves, just going back to the Lions game as well, where he throws like 3 touchdowns and gets his team back into it. There is moments, there is, that sort of hope and promise there for Caleb. I don't think it's been as bad as other quarterbacks that we have seen in these exact scenarios. So that gives you a bit more optimism. And the fact that Caleb is kind of has this mindset about it even makes me even more confident that the Bears have their guy here. I think they really do. But I think that this decision, right now they have an interim head coach with Thomas Brown. He's the play caller, but now he is the interim head coach for the rest of the season. We've seen that growth already too from Caleb, right? From where he was to where he is right now. Thomas Brown's been a big part of that. And since Thomas Brown took over as the play caller, we've seen Caleb Williams' QBR go from 30 to 77. The completion percentage has increased as well. The yards per dropback have gone from 4.9 to 6.2. And in this time with Thomas Brown, Caleb Williams has thrown 5 touchdowns and no interceptions as well. So I agree with Caleb and everything he said. The idea of it just helps him grow up quickly, right? A lot of the times the best lessons you get come from the lowest of lows, the hardest of falls and failures, right? The Bears, I really like what they have here in him, and Thomas Brown clearly has done a good job, so he should be also under consideration as the play caller or as the head coach maybe even. But on that point, on looking forward now, there might not be a bigger, more impactful decision that's made in the NFL offseason more than who the head coach of the Bears is going to be. Quite honestly, if they don't get it right and we get another season like this, then this whole thing could really be in danger. That's why the opportunity, and I don't really think I'm overdoing it. I honestly think that the next guy that comes in here, if they could hit the ground running with Caleb and, build on what we've seen over the last couple weeks and hopefully going forward for the last like 4 or 5, if he continues to improve and be on that trajectory, then we're going to have something here, right? Then they're going to be what I think a lot of people hope that they would have been this year, if not for the head coach and the guys in charge, right? They have to break this recent track record with the quarterbacks, especially because I believe also that they have the most talented quarterback that they've had in a long time in Caleb Williams. With a solid roster as well, they have the best situation arguably that they've ever had around one of these young quarterbacks that they've brought in. So they have all the pieces here. They just got to find a way to put it all together. And having the head coach there is the final piece of the puzzle. It's what makes everything complete, right? You can have all these pieces and it looks pretty nice from the outside looking in, but you look at that picture, you look at that puzzle a little bit closer, and you notice that it's not a complete picture because you're missing the most important piece, right? The head coach, right? The guy that leads this team, this young team, not to mention also. So they have to get it right at this point. And, the names that are being typically thrown out there are your Ben Johnsons, your Kellen Moores would be an interesting one. Other guys like Aaron Glenn for the Lions as well. He should definitely be getting a lot of looks, in my opinion. Arthur Smith, I'll throw him out there for the Steelers offensive coordinator. I mean, their offense has been looking pretty well, so, why not? Joe Brady's another one, too, for the Buffalo Bills. He's really, from what the Bills were in the first half of last season to the second half and then until now, they're playing like one of the best teams in the NFL, so I'm sure he's going to get a bunch of calls as well on those things. So there's a lot of candidates out there, and you can't go wrong with any of them. Thomas Brown's another one, right? If you want to make that decision, and it would be a pretty, not bold, but it would be a little surprising, but he's done a great job, so I'm not saying he doesn't deserve it, but I feel like they would go from the outside to come in, but I don't know. If he gets it, that's great for him. But he would be another interesting one that you can't completely turn your head from. But the last thing I will say on this, and why, I'm mentioning this as a huge, organizational, future-altering kind of decision, right, for the Chicago Bears, why I don't think it's an exaggeration, is because you look at the rest of the quarterbacks that have been drafted, right? Jaden Daniels, ideal situation, right? Ideally, that's what you want drafting a first-round quarterback to look like, right? Jaden Daniels is already off and running. Drake May, it took him a couple weeks, right? But he looks like everybody in New England loves him and they believe in him. So he's already, off and running ahead of Caleb. Bo Nix is another one. The last quarterback taken, he could be in the playoffs this year, much like Jaden. So he's also a lot further ahead in terms of fit and how everything's developed than Caleb Williams, right? So you're always going to have these constant callbacks, comparisons to those guys, and maybe, we're not even at J.J. McCarthy yet or Michael Penix, right? The decision to draft Caleb, it's always going to go back and be compared to Jaden, Drake, and Bo. So with that being the case, you don't want this to be a massive blemish. Like, you drafted number 1 overall. You could have drafted any of these guys. You took Caleb, not a bad choice, but you messed it up so badly compared to these other teams that you're still back there where the other teams are years ahead of you. I think that is also a huge thing to point out because, all these other teams were arguably in the same spot that the Bears were, and arguably in worse situations around their quarterbacks, but they're making it work. They're obviously doing something that the Bears aren't doing clearly this year. So that's also another, threat that you want to avoid, right? You don't want to be the one team that got it wrong where everybody else around you hit the nail on the head. So that's why I think this decision is so important. Not only, again, because of those comparisons, but because I do believe that Caleb is a great quarterback. They just can't mess it up like they've kind of been known to. So they got to break this trend here. And the next head coach that comes in has to be the right choice. It just has to be for the Chicago Bears if they want to turn their luck around. So that is all on Caleb Williams and in this segment. Thank you guys for joining me on today's episode. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the Chip Shot Football Podcast, as well as following the network on all forms of social media and checking out the YouTube channels to catch more content around the Chip Shot Football Podcast. And also a reminder to join me every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time when these live shows go live, obviously, and go on air, where we cover the NFL, all the breaking news, discussions, the games, predicting them, all that sort of stuff. You can catch it here on the Chip Shot Football Podcast with me, Manny Maradiaga, as your host. We're just minutes away from Thursday Night Football. Go watch the game, and we'll be back here tomorrow to discuss that and look ahead to Week 14.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit and the